When I started playing Ghost of Tsushima, I just couldn't connect with it. It wasn't that I found the game bad or had any major issues with it or technical issues and bugs. I didn't have anything like that. I just could not get my brain to fire off any sort of serotonin or any sort of chemical that made me feel joy or pleasure while playing the game. I just wasn't connecting with it, wasn't having fun. So I put the controller down and just kind of moved on. A lot of you viewers out there and fans of the channel were tweeting me, were sending messages on Discord being like, Luke, why aren't you talking about this game? It's freaking fantastic. And I heard you. I tried to be as candid as I could, but basically, believe it or not, I don't like being a cynical all the time, at least. I don't like trying to put a game down or critique it if I'm just not getting it and connecting with it. So usually when this type of thing happens, I just kind of shut up about it. I don't make videos on it. I don't make critiques on it. I just move on because I'm not connecting with the game, and I'm not going to pretend as though I am or pretend as though my critiques of the game are valid because I just don't connect with the game. That wouldn't be interesting for you, wouldn't be interesting for me, so I just don't bother. And so I and many of you guys out there just assumed that I would never make a video on Ghost of Tsushima because I just couldn't get into it. But all of that changed with the director's cut. This launched in the late summer of 2021, about a year after the original game's launch, and it brought a ton of quality of life improvements, such as 60 frames per second on PlayStation 5, haptic feedback, adaptive trigger support, improved animation quality, lower load times so you could basically immediately jump from scene to scene. Even full Japanese lip syncing was brought to the game, in addition to the multiplayer mode Legends that they brought to the game. Everything was massively improved in almost every way that you could possibly hope for. And so I decided I would give this a shot. This was the last opportunity I was going to give the game to win me over. So I got the director's cut, I sat down on my couch, and I started playing. And you know what? I freaking loved it. I really don't know what happened in my brain that changed this, that made it enjoyable for me. I don't know. If you're a psychologist and know what's going on in my brain, I would love to hear it because I'm extremely confused. One day I could not get any sort of enjoyment or pleasure out of Ghost of Tsushima, and the next day I was enjoying it and I couldn't put the controller down. It was bizarre, I grant you that, but I'm very glad it happened because this game is amazing. I don't know, maybe it was the 60 FPS and the PC Master Race proponent in me was like, yeah, 60 FPS, you can enjoy the game now. I don't know if you've experienced this with Ghost of Tsushima or another game, maybe like Elden Ring, you just couldn't connect with it until you tried it in some different way. Let me know in the comment section below. I want to know that I'm not totally insane and out of my mind. If I don't see any comments on that, I will be sad, but I will deal with it. The point of all of this is that I enjoyed the game. I played through it and the DLC in the span of like a few days because I could not stop playing. I went through every single quest line. I explored every nook and cranny of the islands. I loved it. I had a great time, and I'm here to talk about it and critique it with you today in this video, or I guess more specifically over the course of the next 4 episodes of the Ghost of Tsushima Ultimate Critique, which will be releasing every Monday for the next month. This was actually a suggestion from a lot of you viewers out there who got frustrated that some of the big critiques were like an hour, 2, 3 hours long, or like the Uncharted series critique, which is 8 hours long. It's a little intimidating, I grant you, I understand that. So I hear you, we're splitting it up into 4 sections. This first part is going to look at the open world design and how they set up the world of the island of Tsushima. And the next part, we'll talk about combat, stealth, all of the gameplay mechanics that are at the center of Ghost of Tsushima. Then we'll discuss the narrative and all of the implications therein. And then lastly, we'll discuss the DLC, what it changes, and sort of the overarching legacy of Ghost of Tsushima and where it's going after this. It's going to be pretty cool. If you like this change, make sure to hit the like button so I know that we should do future critiques like Elden Ring and God of War, Horizon Forbidden West in this style. Otherwise, I'll just assume that you're apathetic towards it and we'll just do whatever is easier. But if you have opinions and feelings, let me know in the comment section and by hitting the like button. It actually does help. And of course, subscribe, ring the bell so you get notified next Monday when the next part launches, or on Friday when the next video game analysis video or video essay goes live. You'll get notified. New videos every Monday and Friday. Subscribe. Easy peasy. We'd love to have you. Or of course, head over to the Twitch stream and follow us. We'll probably be live when this video goes live. So if you're watching this relatively close to when it launched, pop over to Twitch. Say hi. We'd love to see you. I really love you guys. I appreciate you. Don't ever think that I take you for granted. Every single one of you out there that shows on the view counter in the comment section, every single one of you is a real human being. And the fact that you're giving me this much time of your day to watch this content, it blows my mind. I'm truly humbled by it. Thank you. I appreciate you guys. I do. I just want to get that out of the way. Enough sappy stuff. Let's get into it. The ultimate critique of Ghost of Tsushima. Part 1. World design. So the game's map is made up of 3 component zones that stretch the entirety of the island. Or I guess I should say islands. It breaks up into smaller islands off the immediate coast. For the sake of ease of narrative and speaking, I'm just going to refer to it as island, but know that I understand there's a bunch of little ones as well, okay? Don't jump down my throat. Each of these zones is tied to an act in the game. So as you get through the first act, you'll move on to the second zone. In the third act, you'll move on to the third zone, just as you would expect. With each of these zones, the difficulty will rise and the items that can be discovered will increase in potency, which encourages exploration even in the late game. You'll be exploring each of these, usually by horseback, and increase your renown in that area of the island by completing basic activities such as clearing camps, completing world events, and progressing through the core story. Now, if that basic gameplay loop sounds familiar, it's because it is. It's basically the same gameplay loop that's been at the core of every single open world game for the last 10 years or so. And it's also extremely similar in its specificity to the gameplay loops present in, say, the latest Assassin's Creed games and the Far Cry games, which is why so many people have compared this game to an Assassin's Creed title with stealth set in Japan. Those comparisons aren't just because it's like exploration with some melee combat and it's in Japan. It's because the actual world design is extremely similar to Ubisoft's design, but only in the good ways and not at all in the bad ways. In other words, Assassin's Creed, especially in the latest few iterations, leans into all of the worst tropes of AAA or arguably quadruple A open world meta development. It's just painful. But Ghost of Tsushima leans into all of the best tropes and elements of that open world design and sheds all of the crap that's built up around those other open worlds. Now, the unifying element that ties this whole gameplay loop together is the world exploration itself. It's what keeps the player going and gives them an excuse to go through the world doing what they do. And there's a lot of ways that you can motivate the player to do this. It could be that you have really interesting items out in the world that you can only discover if you're hunting them down and looking behind corners and doing little puzzles and things like that. Or it could be that there are combat encounters that grant XP. So if you want to level up and become more powerful to get through later game areas, you have to explore and discover those difficult enemies or bosses or what have you. Or it could be something as simple as just the world is beautiful and captivating and you just want to explore it for the sake of getting to see more of it. And that latter one is the really difficult thing to nail. It's something that sounds easy, make a beautiful open world that's captivating to explore for its own sake, but it's actually extremely difficult to do. I mean, think about the last game you played that had an open world you wanted to just explore for the sake of exploring. It wasn't driven by boss fights. It wasn't driven by trying to find the best loot. It was purely about seeing more of the world. Might take you a minute. That should demonstrate how hard it is to do this. Now, Ghost of Tsushima manages to pull it off. The world is gorgeous. There's no other way to put it. The wind blowing through the trees, the tall grass, the weather system that's extremely dynamic, the very minimalistic UI, everything ties together so beautifully. It's got to be one of the most artistically gorgeous and truly breathtaking games I've ever played. Red Dead Redemption 2 was grounded and realistic and captivating in its own way. This is similar, but also very, very different because it's much more artistic and you can tell that there's a lot more intention behind the color palettes that have been chosen. The world design is not just what's practical or realistic. The world has been designed in a way that's actually meant to evoke emotion as you ride through big valleys, gorges, fields, or along cliff sides. It's so beautiful, it's ridiculous. But in addition to exploring the map for its own sake, the game also pushes you to explore by way of its main quests and side quests, which give you a more guided way of navigating the world. Usually they'll take you to set pieces and areas where there's big scripted events that happen, which are always very interesting and cool to see. And they also offer narrative exposition. You get to meet characters, get to know them and their world and their place within this world all at the same time. And notably, all of the side quests and the main quests in this game tie into the main story. This isn't like some other open world games where you have the main story where you're doing a set number of objectives and you go along this path. And then all of the side content is completely separate from that main path that you have to travel through for the main story. In this game, because the island is relatively small and the Mongol invasion has affected life for everybody there, it only makes sense that the side quests you do will be tarnished and painted with the color of this conflict. Everybody's worried about the invasion. Everybody's worried about the impact this is going to have on their family, friends, and fellows. And it paints with a very different brush everything that you'll do in the game. Because even when you take a break to just do some side stuff, maybe to get a cool armor set or a different cosmetic item, you'll still have this nagging feeling in the back of your mind that doesn't let you fully relax because you know that there's more to do. And I actually really like this. I can't stand it personally when there's a really high stakes main quest and then the side content is totally oblivious and apathetic towards the stakes going on in that main story. It could be something as simple as like Fallout 4, where you have the main quest based around the player's son being stolen and missing. Your child has been kidnapped, and the game developers set it up so that you can just go through the open world, explore, maybe craft a couple of weird houses that don't really look like houses, or maybe you should be allowed to like go and just mess around in Diamond City. Like, it doesn't take itself super seriously, which is okay. It's escapist entertainment at its purest form, but also it's hard to take the story seriously and the events going on in the story seriously when the main character doesn't take it seriously. In Ghost of Tsushima, it's totally opposite, because even when you're writing a haiku and you're just relaxing in a very picturesque place, you're constantly bogged down by Jin being like, listen, I gotta get back out there. I got more to do. It keeps you immersed. It's really cool. The downside of it though is that with this constant tension will be a bit of exhaustion. This game is kind of tiring to play if you are really immersed in it because you're so emotionally heightened constantly. There's never really a moment of respite because there's the constant nagging feeling of impending invasion, impending attacks, more civilians dying. I can do more. I can clear more camps, save more lives. But I would argue that the fact you feel that while you're playing the game demonstrates just how fantastically implemented that world design is within the narrative, tying into the smaller activities you perform while you're just trying to kind of clear your head. Jin doesn't get a break, and neither do you. But beyond the main story and the side quests, and then also exploring the world for its own sake, the other reason to explore is because there's cool things to find, both in terms of basic combat encounters, such as clearing Mongol camps or finding fox dens, shrines, hot springs, etc., that offer individual boosts to the main characters, such as improved health or maybe charms that can improve your overall abilities or powers. Gives you reason to explore. It's beautiful and relaxing, and it also is a nice break from the combat. But the camps are probably the most polarizing gameplay design element in all of Ghost of Tsushima. Some people love these things, some people absolutely hate them, and I totally understand both sides of the argument. You see, clearing camps is pretty simple. Every time you walk into one that's currently being occupied by Mongols, there will be a list of tasks that must be completed. In addition, there will also be smaller challenges like kill an enemy in the smoke from a smoke bomb, which offer additional bonuses if completed while clearing that camp. Again, bringing up the Assassin's Creed and Far Cry comparisons, this is very similar to Far Cry. This is why I said at the time of the game's launch, when people asked me what I thought about the quest design and camp clearing and things like that, I said, I think that this game is much closer to Far Cry in Japan than it is to Assassin's Creed in Japan, because the camp clearing is so Far Cry, it's uncanny. Now, in practical terms, what this usually looks like is you'll show up to a camp, you'll find the objectives outlined clearly in the UI, and then you'll begin just stealthily or bombastically killing everybody in the camp. You might do the bonus challenges as well, as long as they're easy and approachable, and then you'll collect all of the banners that are required to collect in order to clear the camp successfully. One notable change compared to Far Cry and Assassin's Creed is that it's all on Jin. There's no eagle to do it, no drone to do it, which I actually personally really like. The eagle in Ubisoft games, the Assassin's Creed games specifically, have always kind of bugged me because it just didn't feel fair. Like, if you want me to be immersed in this world, okay, cool, let's do it. I love Assassin's Creed Origins. I love Ancient Egypt. This is awesome. Let's go for it. But then you give me an eagle, and the eagle, who I can't talk to because it's a bird, or raptor, I guess, is flying over top and sees enemies, and somehow that gets like communicated to Bayek, and then it's tagged through walls. You can see the outlines of the enemies. It's always bugged me, and I don't like it. So I'm glad that these guys at Sucker Punch didn't fall victim to those same tropes, because I think the game is actually better for it. Just because you can add a tool for the player to use doesn't mean that you should. And the impact of that change is that combat usually ends up being all or nothing. You will take people on in big hordes, clearing the camp out entirely, and then you'll go and collect all the banners, or you'll stealth your way through the entire camp. Usually, you'll go all in one section of gameplay with stealth, or all in the other section with combat skills to be applied. That's it. There's very rarely a mixture of clearing out half the camp with melee and then you go in and you do stealth for the second half, because if you start combat and start fighting with melee, the whole camp will be alerted and you'll have to finish everybody with melee, just like you would expect in real life. So I think it's actually really good because it encourages the player to commit to a play style. If they want to go through the game trying to be just as bombastic and sort of honorable as they can, then they can do that. Or if they want to go through and fight stealthily, they can do that too. The option is there, it's in the player's hand, and it makes sense in the world. Ironically though, there are eagles in the game that can spot characters and tag them for their operators, but it's not the player's eagle. Yeah, later in the game, enemy encampments have eagles that can spot you from the air and alert the camp to your presence, which I just found kind of funny. Like, they kind of flip it on its head. It's like, okay, well, in all these Assassin's Creed games, the players have the eagles and they can do that to discover where the enemies are located. What if we give the enemies that tool and make the player deal with it? I just thought it was kind of a fun inversion of the trope. I liked it. Now, you'll be clearing a lot of these camps over the course of the main story campaign as you go through each of the 3 zones. While the combat is extremely tight and responsive, which again we'll discuss in the next part next Monday, these are largely the same camps, just rearranged. Later on, they do add some new interesting elements, such as the large missile launchers called Hwachas and Brutes that are really difficult enemies, but you're still at the end of the day doing the same thing over and over and over again. You defeat all the Mongols in the camp using stealth or melee, free some prisoners, collect some banners, maybe a special requirement that gives you an extra gift, and then you're done. You move on to the next camp and repeat the process again. And this is my main criticism of Ghost of Tsushima's poor world design. It's centered around clearing these camps, which frees up a section of the map. It makes the people that live in Tsushima feel much more relieved. You can even speak to them in villages and they'll become much more calm and they'll feel more secure in the areas that they live. There is a noticeable and sensible impact for clearing these camps, which is awesome, but they're so damn repetitive that it just starts to feel dry and uninteresting by the end of the game. Like I said, they have some new mechanisms that they bring into the whole equation, but at the end of the day, you're still doing the same thing over and over and over again as you clear these camps repeatedly. For some people, the combat will be engrossing enough that they will not mind. Perhaps it was just that I was blasting through the game in the span of a few days, so I just had all of them densely packed together. I'm not really sure, but whatever it was, to me, these camps felt extremely repetitive. Every single encounter felt the same after a while. It was just kind of disappointing to see, because instead of reaching the end of the game with these new camps and being like, ooh, I wonder what challenge this will bring up, it was just effectively another checklist. I was like, I need to clear this camp to move on in the story, so I guess I'll do it, but I wouldn't if I didn't have to, and that's not what you want in your game world. You want the players to want to engage with the mechanisms and mechanics at the core of the gameplay loop, not to dread engaging with them. In a sequel, this could be relatively easily addressed with more variety in the encampments, or perhaps making the different encampment sizes more variable. So you have some encampments which are small and some encampments which are really big. Maybe you have roaming generals that have to be cleared out that offer extreme combat challenges. There are currently admirals, generals, and higher level enemies in these camps, especially later in the game, that offer a fun new gameplay challenge in addition to the larger hordes that come along at the end of the game. But for the most part, again, it just feels like a bigger brute that you have to fight. If we had mini bosses within every single camp that are varied and feel markedly different, that I think could add a lot of new interesting dynamism to this whole equation. But as of right now, it just is too repetitive. Now, there will also be random combat encounters sprinkled throughout the world. These could be little hordes of Mongol invaders that have taken a civilian captive or something, and you have to stop, kill them all to free the prisoner, who might reward you with some sort of crafting material you need to upgrade your armor or something like that. It's, again, very common in open world games like this, but it's a great thing to see. There's a reason it's in so many open worlds, these dynamic encounters. It's because they're awesome, because it gives you a reason to stop while you're just exploring from point A to point B. Great to see. I want to see more of it. Or more specifically, I want to see more varied versions of it. So instead of just Mongols taking somebody captive, you could have an escaped prisoner from a Mongol encampment, which we saw, for instance, in like Red Dead Redemption 2, which had fantastic dynamic encounters where like an escaped prisoner asks you for help and then tries to rob you if you happen to stop. Or it could be something as simple as like kids running through the forest who you have to help get back home. It could be any number of things that just shake it up and offer a memorable change in pace and an encounter that's just a little different, but helps the world feel more real. There are, again, small instances of this, but again, by the end of the game, it's all going to feel very repetitive because they copy and paste a lot of these things over the course of the game. So I would just like to see more. And it really is a testament to the quality of the game that one of my critiques of it is that I want more of it. Like not many games you can say that about. It's like, yeah, my biggest problem is that I want more of it. That's a good thing. It's a critique and it's a good thing. So it's like a backhanded compliment, like good job. You're awesome at this. That's kind of what I'm doing. The gameplay at the core of each of those elements is fantastic. The combat's great. The exploration feels rewarding because there are items to be found. There's charms to be had. There's cosmetic items to be discovered. But the only problem is that it doesn't feel varied enough, and it starts to feel like you're just doing the same thing repeatedly. That's it. If the game were shorter, maybe that would have fixed it. Maybe instead of 3 acts, if they did 2 acts and kind of tightened everything up, maybe that would have fixed it for me. But again, I played through this game in sort of a fever dream because I became so obsessed with it so quickly. So maybe this is just an artifact of my time being so condensed with the game. If you took your time with it and had a different experience and it didn't feel repetitive, let me know in the comments. Now, the one element of the open world design that I didn't actually find extremely repetitive and boring, even though on paper it should be, were all of the wildlife encounters that help guide you through the open world. For example, the golden birds. These things are scattered all throughout the island and they just pop up out of nowhere. You'll be riding your horse along a beach or through a forest or a valley, and a golden bird will randomly swoop up and start flying alongside you. And these things might just look like a fun item that pops up dynamically while you ride your horse, but they're actually very important because these things lead you to different locations, just like foxes lead you to their dens, which give you charms that improve your combat abilities and different stats. These golden birds lead you to haiku locations, which are usually scenic locations in the map where you can sit down and craft a haiku on the spot. These locations are all beautiful. They're a nice change of pace, and they let you sort of get an inside look on what's going on inside Jin's mind. It's really haunting at times because you hear what he's seeing as he explores these sort of battlefields and war-torn areas, but it's also oddly peaceful because it's a beautiful scene in front of you, but it's so haunting because of what's framed around that scene. It is truly fantastic. Now, these pay out these headbands, which you can wear based on the choices that you make during the haiku. As far as I can tell, they are purely cosmetic and have no gameplay impact, which to me is a real missed opportunity. I think if you were to have the player answer these different options when writing a haiku, you could actually have an interesting payout. For example, if Jin responds while writing the haiku in a very aggressive way, where he's focused on violence and the combat and the destruction of the island, things like that, he gets a payout of a headband that boosts attack power by a set amount, or perhaps a headband that boosts defensive power by a set amount if he tends to answer the options for the haiku in a more defensive way. Or it could be if he's focused on the beauty of the island and appreciating nature around him, he gets a headband that helps boost discoverability of items, things like that. I think could have been really, really interesting and would almost help the player role play and choose how they wanted to approach the world through Jin by answering these questions when writing the haiku. I think it could have been really cool, and I'd like to see more stuff like that in a sequel that implements more player agency into how the character actually turns out. It doesn't have to be a full-fledged RPG, but just something which helps people specialize so it doesn't feel like we're all playing the game in exactly the same way. But once again, to be clear, this isn't really an issue with the game. All I'm saying is that this could be something that could introduce a new fun element that changes how combat, how exploration works based on the player's choices. Even if a sequel doesn't have this or something like it, it would be totally fine. Like, again, these are just small suggestions for what I think could be interesting to add. It's possible that the developers already considered these things and didn't put them in the game for a set reason. Who knows? This is just my best attempt at putting out a suggestion for something that I think could add a new interesting element to the next game, whatever that looks like. But with all of that said, let's talk about just navigating the open world. As I said, you can climb on things, you can run, you can ride your horse. There's a lot of different ways that you can do it. But the singular mechanism that the player will use to explore the map is something called the guiding wind, which I promise is not a euphemism for anything. It's actually pretty cool. You see, Ghost of Tsushima uses the wind as a core element of the game's UI, which I think is probably one of the coolest features, if not the coolest feature of Ghost of Tsushima. Because you see, most open world games give you a big map or a mini map or a compass, which has a bunch of markers on it that you can follow. Those are all fine, and I don't necessarily have a huge problem with the compass. I think the minimap can have issues of its own in a lot of different ways, but that's a topic for a different video. But what Ghost of Tsushima does is way better than anything that those other games do. Because you see, when you have a minimap or a compass, or you have to pull up like your map and hit a marker which creates a pillar of light like in Breath of the Wild or Elden Ring, and then you follow that to your destination, you end up inevitably with your eyes looking up at the compass to see where you need to go, or down at the minimap, and you lose the focus on the center of the screen where everything interesting is happening. If you could possibly come up with a way to keep the players on the center of the screen and still show them where to go, that would be way, way better. And that's exactly what they did here, because the guiding wind just directs the wind towards wherever your marker is. If you want to go over there, the wind will blow that way, and it'll rustle through the trees. You'll see the wind blowing through the air next to you. You'll see the grass blowing in that direction, and it tells you to go that way without ever having to glance at a mini-map, a compass, the main map, anything. It is so immersive, and it is so much better than any of those other systems. It's ridiculous. It's awesome. Now, it's not perfect. There are times when this can actually be so immersive that it ends up causing a lot of frustration or headaches. Because you see, you can set the guiding wind to lead you somewhere, but the guiding winds will just blow the wind towards that item, which means if there's a large body of water, if there's a cliff face, if there's anything that you need to navigate around, it doesn't communicate that to you. It just tells you that way, go that way, and that's it. So there were multiple times when I would set a destination on my map, I would be exploring, I'd be doing something, and then be like, oh, I need to go back and do that thing. And because it's so immersive, you don't feel the need to pull up your map and check where you are and figure out where to go. You just swipe on the touchpad on the PlayStation controller, you figure out where you need to go, which direction, and you start riding. And multiple times I found myself running face first into a cliff or into a large body of water that I had to ride around. Again, it's a small issue. It's one that could be remedied if I just pulled up the mini map and checked it, whenever that happened. But it's still a small hitch. Just a little frustrating. It happened enough times that I felt I should mention it, which is probably indicative that it'll happen to you a few times when you play the game, or it did happen if you played it. Now, the other thing the guiding winds are used for is allowing you to equip different guiding winds to lead you to certain items or locations that will boost certain elements of your character, such as discovering hot springs to boost your maximum health, or these bamboo cutting drills where you can increase your maximum resolve, which helps you perform major abilities and all sorts of cool stuff like that. And it actually is very simple. Once you've equipped the guiding wind for, say, increasing your resolve, it will just point you generally in the direction of where the closest resolve improvement task is located, and you'll just hop on your horse and head that way, looking around, trying to figure out where it's pointing you to. It'll point you in the general direction, and then you climb up the hill or around the house, wherever it may be. You hop off, you do that one, and then you swipe up again to see where the next one is, because the wind will start blowing in a different direction. Now you can cheese this a little bit because you can pull up the map, see roughly which direction the wind is going to blow in, pointing you again roughly in the direction of where the next place is that you need to go to. And you can usually fast travel to the closest point over there in that rough area that it's pointing to, which will speed up the process so that you don't have to ride your horse all the way across the island every time you try to swipe to find out where the next interesting item is that you need to get to. Not a big deal. Like, it's sort of like grinding when you realize like, oh, I need more health, like bad. So you just start hunting around for these hot springs. It's fine. I don't think it's a big issue, but I did want to point out that you can totally cheese it. Now, it's not always super intelligent where and how it points you to. For example, there's this moment where I was exploring hunting down these items with these guiding winds, and it actually pointed me while I was in the second zone from Act 2. It pointed me back to the lower section of the island from Act 1, which is a much bigger trek to make, whereas I would have assumed that the guiding wind would keep me to the area of the map that I was in, even if I had to ride a little bit further, as long as it wasn't as big of a trudge to go all the way back across a large body of water, for example. Small issue again, if you could even call it an issue, but it was frustrating enough that I paused and took a note on it. So I found it to be disturbing to my general progression in the game. It was frustrating. And I should say that at first, I was really kind of peeved that the way that you improve your resolve and health is by hunting down these different areas with these guiding winds. I just thought it felt like such a grindy way to do it. Like you needed to sit down for an hour and just ride across the island, hop in a hot spring, chop some bamboo, hop in a hot spring, chop some bamboo, chop some more bamboo, hop in a hot spring. It was just kind of frustrating that it felt like I was grinding in a game all about exploration. But then I realized the grinding was exploration. All the while I was hunting these things down, I was exploring the island because the guiding wind was loose enough a guide that it just pointed me roughly in the direction that I needed to go. So it was up to me to then discover it with that rough guidance. So what I at first thought was just grinding actually turned out to be encouragement to explore further. And this is what I mean when I say that the world of Ghost of Tsushima is so coherent and cohesive. Everything works together with itself. The wildlife makes you fall in love with the island for its own sake, and it also helps you improve your abilities to continue exploring. The guiding winds help you improve your character stats, so there's reason to use them. And they get you better familiarized with the island itself. Everything in the exploration ties in with the character improvement in combat, whether it's improving the combat abilities with charms that you discover at Fox Dens, or it could be as something like discovering the bamboo places where you can increase your resolve as you level that up. All of those things tie together. So the exploration improves the combat. You discover more items, upgrade your gear, you discover some supplies, upgrade your sword damage, any which way. Like, there's so many cool things that integrate perfectly. It's really, really fascinating how well they were able to pull this off. But you know what? I guess this is as good a time as any to discuss overall exploration variety, because when you're riding across the map, hunting these things down to improve your character stats, you're gonna start to notice that a lot of this feels the same. You see, when a game depends so heavily on exploring the map and discovering items and interesting things to do within it, it's important to shake things up once in a while. If you don't, it's important to keep the game short so that players don't feel as though it overstayed its welcome. In a game like Assassin's Creed Valhalla, the exploration variety is abysmal. and yet the game carries on for over 100 hours. This makes the whole thing feel like a chore, and it feels painfully boring. Thankfully, Ghost of Tsushima is much shorter. I'm not sure, but I think most people would probably be able to finish the game in 25 to 35 hours, depending on how much of the side content they did and how much of their armor and gear they upgraded before taking on the final boss encounter. I will say that fully upgrading one of the endgame sets of armor and your weapons makes the last few combat encounters feel absolutely trivial, but that's something we'll discuss next Monday when we talk about the combat and how all of that works. But as for Ghost of Tsushima's exploration itself, it rarely challenges the player to think creatively about getting from point A to point B, or about possibilities that they hadn't considered before. And I know that that sounds incredibly vague, so I'll clarify. The best game to point to that does this really well would be Breath of the Wild. In the opening plateau of the game, what is effectively the tutorial section, there are a few different shrines that you have to unlock before progressing into the main game, and each of these has a different theme. It could be telekinesis, fire, or ice. If we look at the shrine at the top of the mountain in the Great Plateau, the shrine that will likely be the last one the players access before continuing on to the main game, we can see just how masterfully Nintendo was able to present these different exploration challenges. Namely, that the second you start to go into this snowy area, Link will begin experiencing negative status effects of cold. This will slowly eat away at your health bar until you eventually die, so long as you don't get near a fire or find some other solution. At this early stage of the game, you don't have enough health to just recklessly run into the snow and deal with the cold. And you also don't have a lot of healing items in the form of food, so you're faced with a big question. Am I missing something? How do I possibly navigate the snowy area? What can I do? So the player will keep looking for a creative solution and method by which you could explore the snowy area until you discover the solution. In this case, you'll find that near the base of the snowy area, there's a bunch of peppers that you can find. And if you cook these up, you can actually have a long-lasting impervious to cold effect that heats you up while you explore. So you can go through the snowy area without taking damage. Simply put, there was a challenge posed to the player that you deal with this negative status effect of cold, and the player will figure out that, okay, there's got to be a solution to this. This is the opening area of the game. They wouldn't just have this here totally broken. So you start to hunt for a solution, and then you'll find these peppers, and you're like, peppers are hot. I wonder if I cooked peppers, if they get extra hot, and then they'll last longer, and maybe that'll help me with the cold. They'll heat me up. You do it, and all of a sudden, yeah, that totally fixed it. It's one of the most amazing feelings when playing a game. When you have an idea, maybe this will work. And then it works. It encourages creative solutions, and when they pay off, there's nothing quite like it. Unfortunately, in Ghost of Tsushima, the extent of the difficulties that you'll encounter while exploring are very, very limited. Almost everything you do will be something you've already done. You may come across a large body of water that you need to navigate around, as I previously mentioned, or you could be going around a cliff face to get to a shrine, which requires you to climb up a pre-scripted path with a bunch of prearranged swings and climbing holds, or it could be that you come across your 100th Mongol encampment that stands between you and your goals, requiring you to clear it before passing and progressing. It's just all stuff that you've dealt with 50 times before, whether it's just running through the crowd, climbing up this handhold section, navigating this preset path. It's just more of the same. There are a couple puzzles in the world where you have to sort of climb up something in a creative way. I don't want to spoil it in case you haven't come across these or you haven't played the game and you plan on playing it after this video or series of videos. There are some puzzles, for the record, but they are so scarce and so underwhelming, even in their limited scope, that I wouldn't consider them notable or enough to refute this point. In a sequel, I would love to see more challenges to the player that require creative, dynamic solutions, where the player has to think outside the box and come up with something interesting to solve that problem. Whether it's puzzles that hide limited edition armor and gear, or something very special that's powerful and you have to think creatively to deal with it. Just something, so that not every single item, every single moment of interest is guarded behind combat. Like, just something different. Now, to be clear, once again, none of this is particularly egregious, and it's all certainly passable as it stands. As I pointed out at the beginning of the video, this thing is still like an amazing game. I'm just trying to point out things that they could do better. The fact that it has these issues in my mind and is still incredible shows just how much potential a sequel could have. If this game is phenomenal like it is, they iron out some of these issues and encourage the player to think more dynamically and reward that dynamism in the gameplay loop, you could easily have a 10 out of 10 game of the year, no questions asked. Send it home, signed, sealed, delivered. No question in my mind. Now, there are also smaller, really random issues that don't have much of an impact on gameplay, such as when you're clearing a village, if you get to the last enemy and eliminate them, the mission will be completed and the village rules will set itself to be inhabited. And when you come out of the fade to black, you'll see villagers just walking around like nothing's wrong, but the enemy dogs will still be in the village and will still attack you, even though it's supposed to be in a peaceful state. This was maybe just a bug that I encountered multiple times when I was playing. It could have been patched out by now, but this happened multiple times where I would clear out an enemy encampment, clearing up the village, but the dogs specifically would stay behind and still be in an aggressive state. It was just weird. So again, this might have been fixed, but I encountered it many times well after the launch of Director's Cut. So it's just odd. But you know what? All of this brings us to the central question. What is the overarching feeling that we are left with while exploring the world of Ghost of Tsushima? To me, I feel an overwhelming sense of tranquility. I know that sounds bizarre because the entire island is being invaded by Mongol warriors, but the beauty and peacefulness with which the island and its natural elements are crafted is overwhelming. I can't think of the last game that I played where I could just walk and take it all in. No need for stopping for combat encounters or looking for collectibles or having my UI flooded with notifications and quest markers. The game just confidently lets me live within it, and that's really impressive. The game is just totally unashamed and wholly secure in itself. So many games present the player with beautiful level design, carefully crafted quests, amazing artwork, and so much more, but it's like they're too insecure about the quality of the world's design to just let it speak for itself because they flood it with UI guiding the players every single step. Whether you look at Ghost of Tsushima, Red Dead Redemption 2, or Breath of the Wild, all of these games confidently put themselves forward to the player without any filtration or needless hand-holding. They're as confident in their own abilities to put these worlds together as they are in the player's ability to find the meaning and the satisfaction within the world that these developers have designed. Believe it or not, if the world is interesting and captivating, players will find things to do, and their experience will be far better if they're allowed to explore by themselves without a menu yelling at them to get back on some pre-scripted track. Now, I don't want to belabor the point, so I'll leave it there, but let it be known that Ghost of Tsushima has one of the best crafted open worlds of the last generation. Sure, there's repetition. Sure, there's a lot of things that are copy and pasted. It's still fantastic, which should just make it all the more exciting to think where they could go after this. With a bigger budget, with more time, more employees and artists working on this, now that they've proven the concept, I can only imagine what a sequel might look like. The world is extremely refined and incredibly consistent. The map from edge to edge feels cohesive and as though it's an accurate depiction of a real place. And being somebody who plays a lot of open world games for this channel and these videos, I can confidently affirm that this is really rare to make a cohesive open world that's fun to explore and that feels real and living and like it could be an actual place on this planet. And I know it's like, yeah, it's a real island and it's actually a real place. I get it. I'm saying in the game, this version of it feels real. So often these games just feel like stitched together mini levels or like they're just big video game levels that have been crafted with the sole purpose of providing a checklist of things to do to keep the player busy. But not with Ghost of Tsushima. It feels like a real place that has actual problems that you can help solve. Yeah, it's kind of fun at times, most of the time, but that's sort of a side element of it. It feels so real, so beautiful, so captivating, and you're just lucky to get to explore it. It really is one of the most incredibly well-crafted open worlds of the last generation. And that does put it in the top league with the likes of Red Dead Redemption 2, The Witcher 3, and even Breath of the Wild. And I truly mean that. It's that good. We'll discuss the DLC island and whether or not not they found new ways to tweak this with the DLC expansion and the different island they put there, if they kind of dropped the ball and stumbled a bit. We'll talk about all of that in part 4. Again, subscribe and ring the bell to get notified of when that part goes live in like 3 weeks, but we'll get there. All told, the only issues I have with Ghost of Tsushima's open world design is that it needs a little bit of refinement and it needs more, just more of what it's already doing so well. I love it so much, I just want more of it. It's like when you're eating a delicious dessert and you're like, I have a big issue with this dessert. I just wish there were more of it. You know, it's like that dad joke kind of thing. I love this so much. I just want more of it. I want less repetition so that it doesn't feel like I'm doing the same thing over and over again. I would like more dynamism in how you explore and the player gets rewarded for exploring. But all told, like, this is phenomenal. It's really great. But that's it for our discussion on the open world of Ghost of Tsushima. The next part of this critique will be on combat that will go live next Monday. Subscribe and ring the bell. The bell thing. I almost forgot what it was. So you get notified of when that goes live. Again, we also have uploads on Friday of little video essays or video game analysis projects that I'm working on. So subscribe for those as well. If you've enjoyed this, make sure to hit the like button so I know that you enjoy this new format and structure to these videos. It actually does really help this video perform as well. YouTube loves the like button, so liking it really does help. But I'll leave it there. Thank you for watching. I really do appreciate you guys more than you could possibly know. I'll see you in the next video on Friday, and then I'll see you in the next part for Ghost of Tsushima's ultimate critique on Monday. See you then. Hugs and kisses. Bye-bye.